Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Rejoining me after a 5-day weekend from the podcast, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. I know it's a very busy time for Rob, end of the semester, heading towards Christmas break. So a lot going on, as you can see in the background there. He's actually in his classroom right now. But I know, Rob, that you are looking forward to this, getting to talk a little bit more about Sunday's win over the Houston Texans and starting to peer forward to what is now a monumental matchup for the Seahawks, going to LA to face the Rams in Week 15. It's win or basically get knocked out of the playoff picture. The Seahawks still with just a 3% chance of getting into the postseason, but they're hanging on by a thread with their second consecutive win. So we'll be breaking down that win on Tell the Truth Tuesday. Some hot takes potentially coming out of that Week 14 victory, taking a peek forward at the Rams, who are dealing with a very difficult situation this week, heading into the NFC West matchup. As always, we appreciate you taking the chance to listen to Locked On Seahawks as your first listen. We're available for free on all platforms. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks are 5-8. They're still 3 games under 500, and in most seasons, that would mean that you're pretty much out of the playoff race. But 2021 is turning out to not be like most seasons, Rob. The Seahawks, even though they're 13th seed right now in the NFC, they are only 1 game out of the final wildcard spot. The final wildcard spot is right now held by a 6-7 team. The Seahawks at 5-8 are just 1 game out. Obviously, a bunch of teams in front of them, but certainly getting that second consecutive win. Now 4 games left to go in the season. The Seahawks have at least given themselves a semblance of control over their own destiny. They're going to need a little help from other teams, even if they win out. But winning their last 4 games, getting to 9-8, they would have above a 50% chance of getting the playoffs. And who would have saw that coming after they fell to 3-8 with a loss to Washington a few weeks ago?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that if the Seahawks do win out, then I think that they have a very good chance of making the playoffs. And obviously that would be a spectacular scenario for Seattle, just getting in the playoffs in the first place. But also it would mean the Seahawks are one of the hottest teams in the NFL. And you don't have to go very far back in history. Just a year ago with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning the Super Bowl as a wild card team themselves. So that's the thing, is that if you get hot in the winter, then it's easy to be able to parlay that into a deep playoff run. So some exciting things there. As you mentioned, Corbin, there are a number of teams, of course, ahead of Seattle currently in the NFC playoff standings. As you mentioned, Seattle currently has that 13th spot, but there are 5 teams that are just 1 game ahead of Seattle at 5-8, or excuse me, at 5-8, or excuse me, 6-7. And so because of that, if you are just able to continue winning, then just kind of the nature of attrition, you're going to see some of these other teams drop off. And I'll just mention some of those teams that are currently ahead of Seattle, and just think about their quarterback situation. How likely are they going to be able to reel off 4 consecutive victories from the New Orleans Saints, from the perhaps the Philadelphia Eagles, the Atlanta Falcons, the Washington football team, San Francisco at 7-6 right now, but obviously Seattle owns a tiebreaker over them, having swept the season series. So again, if Seattle is able to continue this recent hot streak, then, which is obviously easier said than done, but if they are able to do so, then I think that playoff chances are actually a lot higher than 50%. I think they're closer to 70, 80, 90%, just because of the way that some of the other teams are going to fall off.
I do think that the quarterback position is something to note there, because Matt Ryan is not the Matt Ryan he was even a couple of years ago. He's at the tail end of his career in Atlanta. Jalen Hurts, the Eagles have been winning a lot of games because they've gotten their run game going, and Hurts has been fine. He's done a decent job, but not an elite quarterback, not even a mid-level quarterback in the league, at least at this point. New Orleans, they've got Taysom Hill playing back there now. He threw 4 interceptions 2 weeks ago in a loss to the Dallas Cowboys. So even though they just beat the Jets are not a good football team. So that is a football club right now, the Saints, I just can't see them rattling off a bunch of wins in a row, given their quarterback situation. So the Seahawks with Russell Wilson, they have a huge advantage in that regard. Now, is that going to translate to them winning 4 straight games, especially when you got the Rams and Cardinals still on the docket? It's going to be very difficult for them to do that. But really what ultimately is dragging their playoff chances down, we keep bringing this up week in, week out, but they just haven't fared well enough against conference opponents. And several of those teams that are in front of them in the standings, the 6-7 Minnesota Vikings, who have a pretty good quarterback in Kirk Cousins. They just got Dalvin Cook back, and he looked amazing against the Pittsburgh Steelers last Thursday night. You've got New Orleans. You have Washington. Those 3 teams all beat the Seahawks head-to-head. And so if those 2 teams are tied for that final wildcard spot at the end of the season with 9-8 records, the Seahawks are the ones that are going to be heading home because they lost those games. The 49ers are the one team that they do have that tiebreaker control over after sweeping them. But that's going to end up being something that I think is probably going to come back to haunt them, though I could see the Saints losing double-digit games with the way things have played out, their quarterback situation. Minnesota's been so up and down. Who knows what they're going to do to close out the season. Washington, they've been pretty hot as of late, but they did just lose to the Cowboys. They've got some tough games coming up on their schedule to close out the season. So those teams could all falter enough to open the door for a 9-8 Seahawks team to get in the playoffs. But again, they've got to control their destiny by winning the next 4 games. So I do think those tiebreakers remain the biggest obstacle for them.
No
and
question.
then the second biggest would be the fact that the 2 teams that are fighting for the NFC West crown, you've got road games against both of them coming up in the next 4, which certainly helps them. They get to play the Bears and the Lions at home. The Bears looked good for 2.5 quarters against the Packers the other night, but then they reverted back to the Bears we've seen most of the season, and the Packers ended up winning that one fairly easily. And then the Lions, after their first win, they fell flat this past week, got blown out. So they still have 1 win on the season. Those are games the Seahawks should be favored to win at home. You get those 2, you beat the Rams this next weekend, you set yourself up for week 18 to play the Cardinals. That might be a game that gets flexed into prime time and suddenly has a ton of meaning because the Cardinals might be playing for their NFC West championship hopes. The Seahawks, if they're 8-8 at that point, could be playing for the final wild card spot. So there would be a lot on the line in Arizona. Everybody has to hope that we get into a situation like that because you want the last game of the season to matter. If Seattle loses another game, it's probably not going to. That's just the reality.
Well, it's not going to as far as the playoff chances for the Seahawks, but I think that you're seeing a Seahawks team that has been rejuvenated. And Pete Carroll kind of mentioned it with a question about Rashad Penny and kind of acknowledged the impact that Adrian Peterson may have had with the way that Rashad Penny just seems to be a whole different type of player right now. I think that you're seeing it with the passion with which Al Woods played against the Houston Texans, for example, as well. This is a team that feels like they're still having some fun, that they're still enjoying playing football. So, that's the thing. And obviously, you're putting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit. We're talking about Seattle being able to reel off 4 more consecutive victories. Win this game against the Los Angeles Rams. And I do think that is a winnable game. That's exactly the type of game that you want. You want it to be against a divisional opponent that you know very well, that's coming off an emotional high of an impressive Monday night victory. This is exactly the type of game that the underdog has been able to win in this topsy-turvy 2021 NFL season.
We're going to get to Tell the Truth Tuesday here in a moment, maybe dishing out some hot takes stemming from Sunday's win over the Texans. We'll get to that here in a moment. You listen to podcasts for the power of knowledge. You switch to Boost Mobile for the power of saving money, because with Boost, you get the power of a free 5G phone so you can listen to all the latest episodes of Locked On Seahawks. The power of 3 unlimited data lines for $30 a month per line so your family can harness all that brain power too. And the power of one of America's largest 5G networks, so you can do it all at the speed of 5G. With all that money you'll save and all that knowledge you'll gain, just how powerful will you become? Switch to Boost Mobile today and find out. Get a free Samsung Galaxy A32 5G when you switch to one of America's largest 5G networks. More power to save. That's Boost Mobile. Super Bowl 56 is coming up at SoFi Stadium, less than 100 days away, and On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL is the only place to score a once-in-a-lifetime Super Bowl ticket and experience package. Select your exact seats and choose from elite experiences featuring an exclusive pregame celebration with NFL legends, 5-star hotels, and food by the great Wolfgang Puck. Visit onlocationexp.com/SB56 for more information or search Super Bowl On Location. That's onlocationexp.com/SB56 or search Super Bowl On Location. The Seahawks improving to 5-8 on Sunday. I had to break down that victory over the Houston Texans by myself on Victory Monday yesterday due to some difficult circumstances this week. So I know, Rob, you have been chomping at the bit to talk about this game because we hadn't seen the Seahawks win back-to-back games this entire season. Miracles do happen in 2021, apparently, and it didn't necessarily look like it was going to go that way early. The Texans had the lead after the first quarter, but to give you a chance to kind of dish your thoughts on the game, as we've been doing the last couple of weeks for Tell the Truth Tuesday, you and I are going to be dishing out 3 takes stemming from the game or maybe the last couple of games that are Seahawks related. 4 games left to play. For Tell the Truth Tuesday, what's your first take? What's the first observation or takeaway you've got coming out of Sunday's win in Houston?
Well, I think you got to focus in on the superstar of that game, the breakout player of that game, and that clearly was Rashad Penny. And I guess if I do have a hot take, it would be that Rashad Penny, not only has he clearly established himself as the running back who should start every one of Seattle's remaining games this season, whether it be in the regular season or the postseason. I think if he continues to play at this type of level, then he absolutely deserves to get a contract, and Seattle will extend him a contract because they have to be concerned that some other team is going to steal him away. When you have a back that has his size, has his speed, then really those guys are rare. And so the familiarity that Seattle has with Rashad Penny, the fact that he has, obviously struggled with durability, he's not likely to get any big time offer from another team. And so I think that Seattle needs to capitalize on that. They need to keep that carrot in front of him. He's got to be able to continue to be that same player throughout the rest of the season. But if he does, then I absolutely expect that he would be back in Seattle next season.
I'm going to go to the line that was blocking for Rashad Penny yesterday. And it's funny, I got a question in our Monday mailbag about this, whether Jake Kieran was better than Brandon Shell. And I'm going to stick with what I said yesterday. I don't know if Jake Kieran is better than Brandon Shell at this point. What I do believe, though, after watching the All-22 film again from this game against the Houston Texans, and he was going against a few decent players off the edge. The Texans have some talent on the outside with Jacob Martin and John Grenard. Those two can get after the quarterback. So I thought he got, tested a little bit by those guys. I thought his run blocking was extremely impressive in this game. So my first Tell the Truth Tuesday take, I think Jake Kieran should start at right tackle for the remainder of the regular season. See what you have in this kid. Yes, you have a chance to make the playoffs, but you also have to look at the fact you're 5-8 and be looking towards the future at the same time. Pete Carroll is never going to admit that, but I don't know that Brandon Shell is going to be fully healthy the rest of this season. The shoulder injury that he's been playing through, in the second half, they've had to replace him 2 different times. Now, maybe 1 week off was all that he needed, but I find it hard to believe, given how significant that shoulder injury has been for him, that's going to get turned around that quickly. So you keep moving forward with Jake Kieran, and there's going to be some bumps in the road. He's an undrafted rookie, but I was impressed enough by what I saw yesterday. The fact that he stepped in at left guard the week before, a position he's not familiar with. He had his struggles, but he survived against a really tough 49ers defensive line. He's checked off every box to this point that you were looking for, all you can ask for. And I think he can be your starting right tackle next season. So why not? Now that he's shown he can do it on an NFL field, he can play against NFL competition. Why not throw him in the fire for these last 4 games? I think he's earned that opportunity. I think the Seahawks have to be realists that, yeah, we could still make the playoffs, but how sweet would it be to get to 9-8 knowing that you also were able to get big-time snaps for an undrafted rookie that now probably can be your starting right tackle for at least the next 3 years? That would be a huge boost to morale, not just for now, but for the future of this offensive line. So I would argue Jake Kieran needs to start the rest of the games at right tackle the remainder of this season. That's not knocking Brandon Shell. I'm just looking from a roster building standpoint and what's going to give me the best chance to win right now. I think it's Jake Kieran at right tackle.
No, I think that you're absolutely right. I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to go up to do against the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, a very formidable pass rush. Brandon Shell struggled against the Rams earlier this season as well as last season. So to me, Kieran at right tackle makes a lot of sense. I kind of shifted there and took the low-hanging fruit there with Rashad Penny in my first takeaway. I'm going to go with a defensive player who, frankly, I don't know that gets enough attention, enough credit for how good he was. And that was Darrell Taylor. Darrell Taylor, I thought, took over that game in the second half. Now, as you mentioned, Corbin, in the kind of, leading up into this breakdown of Seattle and Houston a week ago, Davis Mills was fantastic. The rookie, just completing every pass that he threw basically over the entire first quarter. But after halftime, again, Darrell Taylor took over. His straight line speed off the edge, his ability to turn the quarter. I really think that this guy is going to be a superstar. You have to remember, this is basically his rookie season, but he is clearly Seattle's best pass rusher. I'm looking at him to be able to take advantage of a Los Angeles Rams offensive line that I know statistically is doing pretty well in terms of protecting Matthew Stafford, but at the same time, he's absorbed sacks, multiple sacks, in 4 of his last 5 games. It's going to be on the Seahawks, and especially Darrell Taylor, in my opinion, to be able to have a splashy performance if he is going to be able to continue to be the force that Seattle needs him to be off the edge.
Perfect segue to my featured defensive lineman here for Tell the Truth Tuesday. And the truth is, Al Woods has been the best addition on defense for the Seahawks in the last 2 seasons when you're looking at bang for your buck. And this is not knocking Jamal Adams, because I thought Jamal Adams was playing very good football before his latest season-ending shoulder injury that required surgery. But you also had to give up 2 first-round picks, and you had to give him a record-breaking contract extension. So there were costs everywhere bringing Jamal Adams to Seattle. Al Woods didn't play last year due to COVID, and they had him on their roster in 2019. He had a pretty solid season, but it ended on a sour note with him getting suspended at the end of the year. So the Seahawks decided not to bring him back. They lose Jaron Reed. They have to release him. They quickly go back and get Al Woods. There was a lot of skepticism, even on this podcast. What is Al Woods going to bring them? He's 34. He didn't play last year. Well, what he has done is, aside from Quandre Diggs and maybe Bobby Wagner, he has been the most consistent, invaluable performer on this Seahawks defense. Even when they were struggling early in the year, Al Woods was a force in the middle. And I'm just, I go back to training camp when he forklifted Kyle Fuller during one-on-ones. And yeah, we've knocked Kyle Fuller a lot on this show for his struggles in pass protection. But to do that to an NFL offensive lineman, forklift him and throw him like 5 yards, everybody along the sideline, jaws were just dropped. And he called himself country strong. You mix country strong with 340 pounds like Al Woods, that is a monster to try to block. And the Houston Texans, they simply could not block him at all. The only mistake he had was he roughed the snapper, which, going back and watching that, it stinks that was called a penalty, but you can't touch the snapper. That's just the rules. But he was just dominant at the line of scrimmage, and the quickness, the lateral movement that he has for his size and his age, you just don't see that combination. And the Texans had so much trouble trying to block him, especially on zone concepts. If you try to reach block him, he was swiping hands away and then getting into the backfield. And he was just living back there, almost had a safety. So with his age, I don't know if Al Woods gets re-signed after this year just because of the fact he's going to be 35. But if he keeps playing the way he has this year, you've got to bring him back. He's been one of their most invaluable players this year. And again, I think when you're looking penny for penny, he has been the best investment on defense the Seahawks have made the last 2 seasons. If you go back 3 years, it's Quandre Diggs. But the past 2 seasons with Adams, some of the other big names they've added, clearly to me, Al Woods, maybe a little bit over DJ Reed as well, he has been their best value in terms of adding to this defense.
Not only their best value, he's been just physically dominant, as you just described. And so to me, that's a great segue back onto the offensive side of the football with Seattle's most physically dominant player, in my opinion, is still DK Metcalf. Now, I listened to an interesting conversation on Sports Radio 950 KJR earlier this morning, kind of talking about Tyler Lockett versus DK Metcalf. Who's the better receiver? To me, there's no question. Tyler Lockett's the better receiver. He's a better route runner. He has more reliable hands. He's better in improvisational game that Russell Wilson is so good at. But in terms of physical talent, there's also no question DK Metcalf is that. And so one of the things that he can do to become a receiver of Tyler Lockett's pedigree, become an all-pro, is he's got to use that big frame a little bit better. Time and time again, Corbin, it feels like that DK Metcalf wants a jump ball situation. He jumps back. He falls away from the football. Instead of using that 6'3", or 6'4" height and those leaping ability, those long arms to be able to pluck the football out of the air. I want to see him do that. That's what's going to take for him to be able to take his game to the next level and be able to turn some of those wannabe touchdowns into actual touchdowns in the NFL.
For my last one, I'm going to go back to the secondary, and I've talked a lot. Last week, I said that Sidney Jones and DJ Reed were playing like a top 5 cornerback group. I'm sticking with that. And I know the Houston Texans don't have a ton of talent. They do have Brandon Cooks, and Nico Collins is not a bad rookie. And the passing game, the success that the Texans had early was not really on the corners. They were feasting on the linebackers and the safeties, particularly Ryan Neal. That's where they were getting a lot of their big plays, not on the outside. So this is going to be maybe my biggest hot take for today. I don't consider it a hot take. A lot of our listeners that are on social media will probably be coming after me with pitchforks because they might be thinking I'm saying I don't like DJ Reed, which is totally not true. But I think Sidney Jones deserves a second contract as much, if not more, than DJ Reed going into the offseason. Personally, I think you've got to re-sign both of them. I think both these players need to be in your secondary. You don't know what Trey Brown's going to look like coming back from a patellar tendon injury. That is a significant knee injury that a lot of players are not the same when they come back from. It's better than it used to be because of medical advances, but we don't know what Trey Brown's going to look like. So I think you've got to re-sign both of them this offseason. But I think if you had to pick between the two of them, it becomes a very interesting discussion because on one hand, DJ Reed has a lot more versatility. You can play him in the slot. He's got the special teams ability. But this team has struggled so much finding stability at outside cornerback, aside from Shaquille Griffin. They've been rotating guys in. They've had players like Trey Flowers that just haven't progressed. Sidney Jones was a clear first-round talent coming out of Washington before he injured his Achilles, and he is playing at that level right now. Another game with 2 catches given up for 7 yards. He blew up Brevin Jordan, a big tight end, on a screen on 3rd and 1 and stopped him at the line of scrimmage. He had another play where he came up on 3rd down and blew up somebody. He's doing things we didn't expect Sidney Jones to do from a physicality standpoint. And, if it would have just been one game, then I probably would have just scoffed at it. It's just one game. But he's been doing this now for a month. He's playing physical football against the run. He's doing a good job tackling bigger tight ends and bigger receivers. He's getting pass breakups every single week. And so DJ Reed's playing great football too. I just think from that prototypical outside quarter standpoint that I think Sidney Jones has made himself some money here. I think he's bought himself another opportunity to start for the Seahawks next year with how he is playing. He's going to get tested this next week going against the Rams, Cooper Kupp and company. But I think that he has certainly put himself in the discussion just as much as DJ Reed to get a contract going into the 2022 season. Speaking of those Rams, Cooper Kupp and company, we're going to discuss what's new with the Rams, and there's a lot that's new with them that we weren't expecting to talk about going into today. Going to be looking at the Rams heading into this rematch. But first, I want to tell you guys about the most comfortable socks that I have ever worn from Stance. If you're looking for comfortable, sleek-looking socks to change up your footwear game, Stance has you covered. Founded in 2009, Stance Apparel represents a radical reinvention of socks, underwear, and active apparel, and they've got a sharp focus on comfort, quality, creativity. So Stance brings an atypical aesthetic alongside some of pop culture's hottest collaborators for the ultimate in style and self-expression, because everything you wear should be a direct extension of who you are and how you feel. So for me, I'm a superhero nerd by heart, so I personally got a couple pairs of Star Wars and Batman socks. So these amazing designs, I don't know that my fiance would agree that are amazing, but they're top-notch quality. I've worn both of my pairs a bunch. They've shown minimal signs of wear and tear. So that's really the big thing, because for me, a lot of times my socks fall apart because I've got huge feet. Size 14 feet for a 6-foot tall guy, abnormal. Normally my socks are unraveling, but Stance has the ultimate in comfort and durability with their socks. They believe the perfect fit matters more than fitting in, that those who feel good do good. Go see for yourself. Register for an account at stance.com and get 15% off your first purchase. Use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout to apply. Enjoy the color and comfort of a life less ordinary with Stance. All right, Rob, 5-8 Seahawks getting ready for a rematch with the Rams. They had the Rams on the ropes back in week 5. They were actually winning the game at one point. At halftime, they were up. But then Russell Wilson gets hurt. Geno Smith comes in, almost leads them all the way back, and the defense just can't get enough stops for them to win the game. And that was really a game that was a huge turning point for the Seahawks season because it looked like they might get the home win, and they would have been 3-2. Instead, they were 2-3. Russell Wilson's going to have surgery. You've got your backup quarterback. The sky is falling. Now these two teams are playing each other, both riding some momentum. The Rams with a huge win over the Cardinals on Monday Night Football. The Seahawks, obviously the Texans are nowhere near the Cardinals caliber, but the Seahawks have won 2 consecutive games. They beat the 49ers 2 weeks ago, who, by the way, beat the Rams earlier this season. So both teams have momentum going into a game that's got a lot at stake for both clubs. The Rams very much still in the hunt for an NFC West title. The Seahawks have been eliminated from that discussion, but they still can make the playoffs. So a lot on the line for both teams. And the Rams, Rob, had a very crazy Tuesday with 9 players added to the COVID-19 list. They already on Monday had to place star corner Jalen Ramsey and tight end Tyler Higbee on that list. Higbee was activated today, but they've got a real problem on their hands. They've got 13 players, 11 on the roster, 2 on the practice squad now, that are on the COVID-19 list with 5 days until kickoff in SoFi Stadium. That creates a storyline I don't think either one of us anticipated we were going to be talking about, but that's the nature of a pandemic.
It really is. And that's the thing is that, so many of these players play different positions. I mean, almost literally every single positional group is impacted by the Rams players. Now, you mentioned the fact that Tyler Higbee, the tight end, was activated, but the cornerback, again, Jalen Ramsey, he is on that list. Another defensive back, Jordan Fuller, is on the list. A linebacker, Terrell Burgess, is on the list. One of the Rams' better defensive linemen. It doesn't get much attention. Sebastian Joseph Day is on that list. Let's switch out on the offensive side of the football, where Rob Havenstein, a longtime starting right tackle for the Rams, their running back, Darrell Henderson, and the wide receiver, Odell Beckham Jr. All of them are now on that list. So, the Rams are going into this game without a significant number of those players. And this is an entirely different Rams team than the one that did beat Seattle and that did look very impressive Monday night in a victory over the top seed Arizona Cardinals. But you mentioned the fact that Seattle was beating the Rams earlier. The last time that the Rams played the Cardinals, they got beat by 17. So, the Rams are up and down as any other team in the league. They've won 2 games in a row, as you mentioned, but they lost the 3 games before that. So, again, this is a beatable team. And so I just think that it's going to be fascinating to kind of see how this week plays out. And then to see, of course, how the actual game plays out as well.
We don't know the vaccination status on those players that were added to the COVID list. At least I haven't had a chance to see if that information was available. But just kind of revisiting the protocols before we start looking at some numbers here with the Rams. The protocol for vaccinated players is that you have to have 2 negative tests in a 48-hour window. And what's changed now is you can't have that second negative test on game day. That was allowed. And then really what changed that was when Gerald Everett wasn't activated to play in their game in week 6 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He missed 2 games in a row, even though he was able to get that second negative test on game day. There were just too many logistical things that prevented it from happening. So there have been adaptations as the years gone on. And so there's 5 days until kickoff. So it's possible a number of these guys, if they tested positive, could have 2 negative tests in a 48-hour window and be available to play. But that means they're missing practices. They're not at the facility. And if you're an unvaccinated player, you can kiss playing in this game goodbye. You're in quarantine for 10 days. So we don't know if any of these players fit that bill or not. But this is going to be something to monitor very closely the next couple of days going into this game, especially given the fact there are a number of starters there and players like Sebastian Joseph Day, who I think is one of the most underrated defensive tackles in football. Having him out of the lineup would be a huge loss for the Rams going against a Seahawks team that thinks they've found their groove running the football heading into this game. And it's also worth noting Robert Woods won't be playing in this game either. He had like 9,000 receiving yards in that first matchup, and he's unfortunately out for the season, tore his ACL in practice. And Robert Woods is one of my favorite players to watch, the way that he is a methodical route runner, very football IQ, smart. But Seahawk fans are probably like, you know what? He's killed us every game. Now we don't have to worry about him. Still got to deal with Cooper Kupp, and if Beckham gets activated, you got to deal with them. They got plenty of weapons, but certainly not having Robert Woods out there, that's a big difference from the first matchup these teams played, and a number of these guys in the COVID list that may or may not be available. Let's dive into the numbers, and obviously this is a rematch. Seahawks fans know the Rams really well, but they did have a stretch there. They lost 3 games in a row. They weren't playing good football. They seemed like they've righted the ship. The Seahawks will be looking to send them back into the loss column this week. But looking at the offense, it's still one of the most prolific offenses in the league, Rob. They're averaging 28.15 points per game, which right now is the 4th best total in the NFL. So still a top 5 offense. And you've also got a quarterback in Matthew Stafford that seems to have found his groove with Odell Beckham Jr. He's thrown 3 touchdown passes to his new receiver in 3 games. So there are some signs that that offense is getting back to where it was early in the year, but they had their struggles. And one of the big reasons why is Matthew Stafford was thinking Christmas came early with the pick sixes.
Yeah, exactly. He's given up a NFL most 3 pick sixes so far this season. And at least prior to the Monday night performance against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona, then he had kind of a reputation as faltering in primetime showings. So, hey, give them some credit. I mean, the Rams look good against the Cardinals, but at the same time, again, they have been up and down. So I'm really curious to see if the Rams, and especially Stafford, are able to continue this torrid play as of late. I mentioned this before about the Rams and their offensive line. Now, statistically, it looks pretty good. The Rams are allowing just 1.6 sacks per game. That's 3rd best in all of the NFL. But at the same time, I saw some weaknesses on that offensive line. I think it's something that Seattle can exploit, especially if the Rams don't have their full complement of running backs, offensive linemen, and wide receivers. Cooper Kupp is absolutely fantastic. I mean, we know this. But at the same time, he is not the one-man show that their offense sometimes looks. And if Seattle's cornerbacks are playing as well against the Rams as they have been over the last month and a half of the season, I think that you've been kind of describing them as a top 5 unit in all the NFL, and I would agree with that. That's the caliber of play they've been playing at. Then this is a team that Seattle can contend with. As you mentioned, Seattle was ahead in their last showing, and I think it's exactly the type of game that Seattle could come in as the hungrier team, and the hungrier team in today's NFL is typically the one who leaves with a win.
What I think stands out about this Rams team, because you mentioned the offensive line, they've been really effective at protecting Matthew Stafford compared to most teams. They have given up more sacks in recent weeks. They also have had their trouble running the football. Sony Michel's been the guy the last few weeks with Darrell Henderson not being available. They're averaging under 98 yards per game on the ground. They rank 24th. They rank 24th in the NFL in rushing yards. So this has been a pretty pass-heavy offense with Matthew Stafford at the helm. And for the most part, that's worked. But they have had some situations against good football teams where being one-dimensional has really hurt them, especially middle of the season when they were losing multiple games in a row. Teams were able to take advantage of the fact that this team could not run the football effectively, and that was part of the reason that Matthew Stafford struggled as he did. I do want to mention with Cooper Kupp, sometimes we like to just, sometimes there's just stats that just jump out that you're just like, wow, that's incredible. He is on pace for 147 receptions this year, Rob. He has 113 catches in 13 games. That is insane. Oh, by the way, over 1,400 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns. I mean, Cooper Kupp has truly become a top 3 receiver in this league can do a little bit of everything, and he's been such a thorn in Seattle's side too. And speaking of thorns, going to the defensive side, I'd be remiss not to mention number 99, Aaron Donald, a.k.a. Russell Wilson Killer. 16 games, including a playoff game. He's got 16 sacks and 38 pressures against Russell Wilson. And I joked about this the first time they met. I don't even know if it's a joke at this point. I think aside from Sierra, nobody's been closer to Russell Wilson than Aaron Donald.
No, I think that's an excellent point there. And yeah, I think that, we would be remiss if we didn't talk a lot more about Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp. I mean, I've been following Cooper Kupp's career since Davis High School in Yakima, Washington, long before he signed with the Eastern Washington Eagles and was, absolutely tearing apart any of the FCS teams as well as the FBS teams, including University of Washington, where he has opportunities there. So, just terrific players, terrific men off the field as well. But again, from a Seattle perspective, they are two players. And so that's where Seattle has to be able to do a better job of kind of containing them. Those two players are going to be able to take over the games at times. To me, one of the fascinating things is the fact that since the Seahawks at last played the Rams back in Week 5, the Rams have added another dynamic pass rusher in Von Miller to add to the complement that they already have with Leonard Floyd and the aforementioned Sebastian Joseph Day. So to me, that's what's going to be the real challenge. We talked about before with the rookie Jake Curran probably going to be playing at that right tackle position. Is he able to handle Leonard Floyd? That to me is going to be one of the fascinating things we're going to be talking about when we get to our Wednesday matchups. But there is a number out there that really kind of, I think, encapsulates how you can take over this game from a Seahawks perspective. Two of them, actually. One is that the Rams are allowing 43. That's the third down conversion rate allowed. That's 23rd in the NFL. You can march the ball down the field against this team. The other way of doing that is by running the football. The three losses that the Rams had here recently, in each game, they allowed at least one rushing touchdown. In each game, they lost the time of possession battle. One of the best ways to be able to keep the ball out of Cooper Kupp's hand is to be able to just make sure that you're keeping the football yourself. So win the turnover game, keep the ball in your hands, work your way down the field slowly, methodically, and melt that clock. That's the recipe for success against the Los Angeles Rams.
And the Seahawks have not been good at either of those things for 95% of the season. But the last 2 weeks, we have seen them do a better job of holding on to the football, sustaining drives. This last game had a pretty good success rate on third down. So we are seeing some improvements, and it's coincided with them winning games. So maybe they can continue that. I think they're going to need to against this Rams team that still has a lot of star power, could be missing some key pieces. We will know more about that, though, as the week progresses. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all other major platforms, available 5 days a week. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be, as usual, breaking down all the key matchups on Matchup Wednesday. Seahawks offense versus Rams defense, Rams defense versus Seahawks offense. Looking forward to it. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.